In the lands between, creatures often tell the stories of various factions. Lions were associated with Godfrey and later Radon, while wolves came to represent the Carians, with Radagon's red wolf wielding glintstone sorcery, Blythe protecting his mistress, and Ronnie granting us a pack of wolves as one of our first spirit ashes. Even creatures like the Golden Centipede came to be a symbol of Golden Order fundamentalists who hunted those who live in death. However, it seems these symbols can be twisted from their original meaning, as lions used to be associated with divine dance before Godfrey. The red wolf came to be more of a jailer, and Blythe ultimately went mad due to the influence of the fingers, becoming something dangerous to Ronnie rather than her protector. With a little bit of influence from the gods, the symbols we know can be tainted. And there's no better example of this than Romina, Saint of the Bud. A woman tainted by the Scarlet Rot, a fate she never would have met if not for Mesmer's flame engulfing the land as he marched on the tower. For our spooky season finale, we're going to tell the story of Romina, the woman twisted by rot, who wanted nothing more than to help the flowers of her church bloom again. Thank you for joining us this month for our spooky season episodes of Elden Lore. If this is your first time finding the channel, welcome. This is the month where Square Table Gaming becomes Scary Terror Gaming, and we focus on the more horrifying enemies of Elden Ring. If you end up enjoying our content, please consider subscribing to the channel, but no pressure, because as we always say, your viewership is more than enough for us. We also have a Discord where you can connect with other Elden Ring fans and talk about your favorite lore, theories, and builds. Don't forget to check out our lore playlist so you can see the over 150 topics we've already covered. And feel free to suggest a video idea you'd like to see us tackle if you don't see it there. With that said, let's get back to the horrible history at hand. There is no written lore on who Romina was before Mesmer marched on the Land of Shadow, but there's one thing I can say with certainty. The woman we see in the trailer for this DLC, backdropped by the Flaming City, is Romina. There were plenty of theories and speculation in the past, but with what we know now, it's abundantly clear that this is the Saint of the Bud before her transformation, cradling her pole blade as her church burns around her. This detail can be confusing if you're familiar with the lore of Salza the Fire Knight, who asked that Mesmer not burn the Rao ruins. But if we consider that the Church of the Bud is where we ultimately burn the small tree that conceals Anira Lim, it stands to reason that even if Mesmer never specifically attacked the ruins, the church would be caught in the crossfire of the sack of Bellarat Tower, which reduced it to a crumbling mess. Perhaps Romina was a maiden of this church, dedicated to the buds that grew within, as her weapon seems to imply. The pole blade of the bud tells us it is the weapon of Romina, Saint of the Bud, a scarlet glaive with a dangling bud-like blade. Once, in the crumbling, burning church, Romina held the bud in speechless silence. That bud would become her blade. We can take the meaning of the bud becoming her blade a little less literally, because after the church was burned to the ground, she discovered something new lurking beneath that would make her blade all the more deadly to those who would threaten her buds. The remembrance of the Saint of the Bud tells us, after the church was burned to the ground, Romina discovered a twisted divine element, which she weaved into the baleful scarlet rot. Perhaps then the buds might find somewhere to gain purchase once more, within the scorched remains. So it was that Romina uncovered that which would become the scarlet rot deep below the church, and she never would have if not for Mesmer's flame. Unfortunately for Romina, the plan to have the buds return to their former glory would never come to fruition, as the scarlet bud tells us it is a large rotten bud that will never come into bloom. Grows in lands blighted by the scarlet rot. There was a time when these buds were not touched by the scarlet rot's blight, when they were the symbol of the small church deep in the ancient ruins of Rao. While she may have been able to propagate them once more, they'll never fully bloom, but this was the least of Romina's problems. It would seem her attempt to propagate the bud with the scarlet rot had certain side effects. When we discover the spider-scorpion ashes, we learn that this breed of scorpion was native to the realm of shadow, but was far smaller in size. Recent giant scorpions are said to trace back to the Church of the Bud. This would mean that the rot granted power to those scorpions who already carried it within their bodies. This makes sense, as all signs seem to point toward the rot's first avatar being a scorpion. The scorpion stinger is a dagger found in the Lake of Rot, being worshipped as a religious item by the kindred of Rot. Its description tells us it's a dagger fashioned from a great scorpion's tail, glistening with scarlet rot. A ceremonial tool used by heretics, crafted from the relic of a sealed outer god. We know it was the blind swordsman who sealed this outer god, and if the scorpion stinger was once a piece of this monster, it would make sense that the rot would find purchase within scorpions, and make them grow in size rather than kill them. This also partially explains what happened to Romina after she started working with the rot. We know Romina used to be some form of human from the DLC trailer, so how did she become this enormous creature dripping with rot, with the tail of a scorpion and front of a centipede wound beneath her own, now transformed, body? She seems to be made up of 3 different creatures: a scorpion, a butterfly, and a centipede. I believe we already know enough about the scorpion to understand why this would sprout from her body. It was likely the physical form of the outer god of Rot, and it now holds sway over her. The butterfly wings are actually explained by the incantation Rotten Butterflies. Incantation used by Romina, Saint of the Bud. Summons a myriad of butterflies while performing a gentle twirl. The butterflies break apart on contact, scattering rot and setting off a chain reaction. The scarlet butterflies are as the goddess of Rot's wings. Bereft of a master, they were soothed by Romina, who reached out to them. Romina found the rot well before Melania bloomed enough to take on her rot wings made of butterflies. So by reaching out to them, Romina inherited their power and gained wings of her own. This leaves the centipede half of her body somewhat of an enigma. You could chalk this up to the kindred of Rot being the abandoned servants of the goddess of Rot. After all, Pest Thread Spear tells us, the pests are abandoned servants, and it is for this reason that they found a mother in the Saint of the Bud. This explains why so many of them take on the red coloration of Romina. But I believe this isn't quite the right answer, as if we look at the kindred of Rot, their faces are not one for one with the centipede body of their new mother. I believe that the true reason for the centipede half of Romina's body comes from the golden centipedes that were found near churches. If a golden centipede, a symbol of the Golden Order, was found in the Church of the Bud when Romina wove together the rot from the element found beneath, perhaps she tainted this symbol of those responsible for the raising of her church and its buds, taking its strength for herself. She twisted the symbol of the Golden Order fundamentalists who hunted death itself into a part of her body that would dole out death and rot, turning any who oppose her into nothing but a puddle. In this way, Romina made herself into something more than a simple maiden of the Church of the Bud. She was now its defender, struggling to help the buds find a way to bloom once again. Unfortunately for her, the flowers of the rot could never bloom without the power of the rot goddess, and while Romina may have been granted a sliver of that power, it was nothing compared to the original god, or its new vessel, Melania. Now we understand why these creatures make up Romina's body, but we still don't have an explanation as to how. It would be easy to wave this away by saying it's the power of the rock goddess working through the divine element she discovered, and that's a valid interpretation. But I think there's another that makes sense when considering the history of the Land of Shadow. Romina is a shaman. The Tooth Whip tells us shaman flesh is said to meld harmoniously with others, and we know the horrifying outcomes of the jar rituals performed by the potentates of the Bonnie village. If Romina was actually a shaman, rather than a random maiden of the Church of the Bud, then she would have the innate ability to meld the flesh of the scorpion and the centipede to her own body. In fact, when looking at her torso, its coloration is similar to that of the jar innards. While I believe her wings were granted by the butterfly she took in, it's possible the rest of her body is the result of Romina melding the flesh of these creatures to her own, so that she may better defend her church and the future of the buds yet to bloom. It's interesting to think that without the actions of Mesmer the Impaler, Romina would simply be a maiden of the church, and the Scarlet Rot would never have found a foothold in the Land of Shadow. Without his attack on Bellarat and his burning of the Church of the Bud, Romina would not have found the ancient disease lurking beneath the ground. The twisted divine element would never become the Scarlet Rot, and the scorpions of the Land of Shadow would not have become the hulking monstrosities we now face. If not for his relentless attack, Romina herself would never have taken up the bud and melded her flesh with the scorpion and the centipede so that she might defend her rotted home. Behind this twisted amalgamation of creatures is a maiden whose only wish was to help the buds of her church bloom. A woman who would soothe the butterflies of rot who knew not what to do after being abandoned by their goddess. Sometimes, the monsters we face are those who have been wronged the worst. So give a thought to Romina before you slay her, because in this battle, the monster is you. Thank you for joining us for our exploration of Romina, Saint of the Bud. Do you believe the woman we see in the trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree holding her weapon, backdropped by the flaming tower, is truly Romina? Why do you think half of her body is now a centipede? Will the butterflies finding a home with Romina someday return to Melania once she blooms a third time? What is the divine element that became the rot? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore.